I make sure I never correct him about anything. Even if we're going the wrong direction in the car or we make a wrong turn, even if he gives incorrect information to someone, I don't bring attention to it. I know how much it hurts him, so I honor him by ignoring it. That was the marriage advice I heard someone give several years back. If you're new here, I'm Tori. I make content about a lot of different issues that intersect with the Christian church. And today we are going to talk about something that has become one of my more recent Roman empires. So when I heard this marriage advice being given, the woman was talking about the concept of respect that she had for her husband. And I had heard this a while ago, and I thought it was really weird and messed up at the time, but I kind of tucked it away, kept on going with my life. And then a few months ago, I was thinking about it, and I was like, that sounds vaguely familiar, but not in the Christian marriage aspect. There's something else that reminds me of, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My educational background is in psychology and mental health, so I thought maybe it was something I learned somewhere along the line, but I knew that wasn't quite touching it. And then it hit me. I had read similar advice being given to someone who was working for a narcissistic boss. And I thought, wow, okay, I need to look into this. So before we go on, I want to define narcissism. That way we're all on the same page, because it is a word that keeps being thrown around and I think is often used in situations that don't warrant it. So I just want to make sure we understand what we're talking about. So I'm just pulling a definition from Psychology Today. They say that narcissism is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a lack of empathy for others, a need for excessive admiration, and the belief that one is unique and deserving of special treatment. People exhibiting narcissism tend to be incredibly sensitive to their feelings being hurt, and they struggle to receive any kind of constructive criticism. So as I began turning this parallel over in my mind and thinking about, okay, what have I been told about Christian marriage advice, and what have I been told about narcissists and how to deal with them? I realized there were some striking similarities, but I didn't want to jump to any conclusions. I hate it when people make assumptions based on things they've just heard and don't look into evidence to see if there's anything actually out there that supports these assumptions that they're making. It gets us into a lot of trouble when we just assume things. In a lot of the Christian marriage advice I had heard it second and third hand. So, sometimes when information gets passed around, it gets distorted. So I thought, okay, I need to find some sources on this. I need to go to some primary sources, the people that are saying it, rather than relying on this sort of telephone marriage advice I had heard. And I mean, that alone, that telephone marriage advice is definitely problematic, but I felt like I kind of needed to work up the chain and see where this was coming from. And I just thought, okay, are there really self-proclaimed marriage experts? Are they really giving advice to wives on how to relate to their husband that is parallel to advice for dealing with a narcissistic boss? Surely that's not happening. It turns out they were, and it was far too easy to find. Between looking through the websites of some well-known leaders in this space, talking to friends about the resources that they were familiar with on Christian marriage, the information I found, the amount of information I found was overwhelming. So as a result, what I'm about to share is just an overview. This would not be digestible if I pulled in every single source I could find and all of the quotes and all of the authors and all of the books. There's just so much. So this is just a sampler platter of what's out there. The other thing I want to note is that I have created content in the past on this topic. So I wrote a blog, I did a TikTok, I think I also might have done an Instagram post at one point. And I just feel like this topic, there's so much that all of those different mediums kind of pick up on a different part of it. And I thought it would be helpful to add a long form video to the list as well. All right, here we go. Some of the parallels I found between working for a narcissistic boss and Christian marriage advice. Number 1, expectations. So when dealing with a narcissistic boss, Forbes recommends lowering your expectations of your boss, even if they have unrealistically high expectations of you. Here's a couple things they say. When communicating with them, it's best to take a detached approach and not expect too much from them. They also recommend attempting to understand your boss's perspective, despite how skewed it might be. These individuals tend to crave admiration and recognition, perhaps due to being raised by narcissistic parents or as a coping mechanism for childhood trauma. So it's best if you have a narcissistic boss to have low expectations. In a similar way, I immediately thought about all of the different things I had been told about lowering my expectations of my husband. But when I listened to the expectations that these wives had, or that I was being told were too high of expectations, I was very puzzled. They were things like the wives wanting help around the house, or being shown a little bit of affection, or having their husbands remember their favorite flower, or simply just asking that their husbands not belittle them. I was taught that these were too high of expectations to have. So of course I had to see, is anyone actually saying these things? And of course, some of you who have been in this world know exactly where I'm going to go. Lori Alexander of The Transformed Wife is totally fine with having very low expectations. So her husband, Ken Alexander, actually said something about his wife's ministry, and Lori Alexander posted it on her blog, and this is what he had to say. The transformed wife is teaching this important lesson, that wives need to lower their expectations and give up the need for appreciation. It's too high of an expectation that your husband says, thank you. Okay. And we need to point out the fact that Lori Alexander calls herself the transformed wife because she had a rocky marriage. And the thing that transformed her as a wife was deciding to submit to her husband in all things, essentially agreeing to whatever he wants to do and choosing to not have conflict with him. Therefore, completely disappearing herself as a person and going along with whatever her husband wants. That was what transformed her as a wife, and therefore their marriage. And I know she's one of the more out there examples, but so many people follow her, and I wouldn't be mentioning her if I didn't personally know people who like her work. But don't worry, she's not the only one. Debbie and Michael Pearl also feel as if simple expectations are a threat to the entire family. If you don't know who the Pearls are, that's amazing. You have been blessed. To say the least, they have been the center of a lot of criticism for a lot of reasons. Most notably, they've had lawsuits filed against them because of the unalivement of 3 separate children whose parents claim to be following the discipline tactics that are outlined in their book To Train Up a Child. But their marriage advice is not much better. So a reader sent in a letter asking the Pearls what to do about her husband. He did not want to be involved with the children. He did not want to be involved with homeschooling. And so she was looking for advice on what to do about it. Debbie told her that she needed to do a personal study of Proverbs 31, Esther, Ruth, and Sarah so that she could develop the ability to see from her husband's point of view. And I've studied those things, and apparently I need to study them again. Michael's advice, however, Michael Pearl, his advice was this. He said this: children may suffer in their lack of education and personality when they don't have more involvement from their father. But they will not be rebellious, disrespectful of authority, and dishonoring of their mother unless their mother is bothered by her husband's lack of participation. Given the father's lack of interest, the kids may have an incomplete education, but don't let your attitude leave them with an incomplete soul. So basically, the father's lack of involvement is not a big deal at all. Like, they might have a lack of education, maybe lack some personality. But the thing that's really going to mess them up is if their mother is bothered, if the mother is upset by the father's lack of involvement. In that case, they're going to be rebellious, disrespectful of authority, and dishonoring of their mother. I still don't get that one. According to the Pearls, this woman should set aside her expectation that their father do the bare minimum for their kids. So that's point number 1. Both Forbes, Lori Alexander, and the Pearls all believe that you need to lower your expectations for dealing with a narcissistic boss and also your husband. Otherwise, you are going to cause upheaval in the relationship, and I don't know, to me that just sounds like placating a really fragile person, but I digress. Okay, expectations was the longest segment of this, so these ones should go a little bit quicker. The second one is that you need to tiptoe around him. Harvard Business Review advises employees to not challenge their narcissistic boss. When you are suggesting something, they recommend that you frame it in a way that benefits the narcissist. That way, the narcissist doesn't feel called out or threatened, and you're able to make your suggestion without it seeming like you know better. There's a lot of emphasis on being very strategic in how you interact with, in this case, your narcissistic boss. A transformed wife says, don't be upset when he shuts you down. That would be threatening to him. Don't be upset when he is mean to you. Wives are to not rock the boat if they feel that their husband has done something wrong or made them feel a certain way. They should not speak up, because if they speak up, that means they are disrespecting him. Or at least he'll perceive it as disrespect. We'll get to that. And here's the thing. This idea is not just given to adults. This is something that starts very young. So in For Young Women Only, Shanti Feldon and Lisa Rice warn girls that if a boy is angry with them, that is a sign that she has disrespected him. And their advisement is girls should take this into consideration so that they don't disrespect boys in the future. So from a very young age, we're teaching girls that anger is a sign of disrespect, and disrespect is always your fault. So in both circumstances, walking on eggshells is the advisement in order to maintain peace and have a good relationship. Otherwise, the consequence will be anger. Number 3, compliment him. Literally. Harvard Business Review recommends complimenting your narcissistic boss. Contrary to how they appear, how they present themselves to the world, narcissists actually have very low self-esteem. They have very fragile egos, and so they rage at any kind of critique or threat, and they bathe in compliments. Here's the other thing they say. Another way to gain your manager's favor is to make him look good in front of his boss. So not only are you trying to make him feel good about himself, but you will also make him feel like he has the security of your support. He needs that sense of safety and comfort. The transformed wife says, publicly embarrass him with compliments. Like how you compliment your boss in front of their boss. You're gonna compliment your husband in front of others. Okay? And her other piece of advice is to look up and smile at him when he enters the room. And on its own, it's not like an inherently bad thing to do, but if your husband is so fragile that you have to smile when he walks into the room in order for him to feel a sense of security, I think we have other issues going on. So on the topic of correcting your husband in front of others, which is one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Carrie and Mindy Green say this. Imagine that you and your husband are at a small group Bible study together. Your husband does something that embarrasses you or says something that you might have found offensive. The worst thing you can do is correct him right there in front of the entire group. It's likely to come across to him like you're chiding him, correcting his behavior like you would one of the children, and he's going to feel disrespected. So this paints a picture of a husband that their sense of respect is so fragile that their wife defending herself or someone else is a threat to his well-being. And I'll say that again. According to this Christian marriage advice, a husband's sense of respect is so fragile that his wife defending herself or someone else is a threat to his well-being. So again, in both of these situations, the fragility of the narcissist/husband is acknowledged. The advice is to compensate with compliments and keep the peace at the expense of truth. Okay, let's pause. Let's just pause for a second. Are you seeing it? These Christian marriage authors are writing to wives and giving them advice as if their husbands are a narcissistic boss. Okay, 4. This is the last one. There are more, but I decided to stop at 4. Avoid triggers. So UW Medicine notes that for narcissists, anything that threatens their self-image can instigate retaliatory behavior. So they recommend avoiding anything that might trigger the narcissist to lash out. And it's really just a game of walking on eggshells if you want to stay on neutral terms with your boss. So I did go for a little bit of a more extreme example for this one because there's a lot of examples out there of avoiding triggers. And I think we've kind of touched on them in different ways with tiptoeing around him and needing to compliment him and that sort of thing. But I think this one, when we're specifically talking about dealing with triggers, I think this is a very apt example. And I am going to talk about later why I'm using these seemingly extreme examples, but I just want to preface this one by saying that. So in response to a wife experiencing physical harm at the hands of her husband, Debbie Pearl writes in Created to be His Helpmeet that she should avoid provoking him and work on respecting him. That is her advice for a wife experiencing physical harm from her husband. There should be no defense, no calling him out, just doing whatever she can to placate him and make sure she does not trigger any more of his physical altercations toward her. So in both of these scenarios, we are supposed to dodge landmines of rage. And remember what we talked about earlier. If anger is a response to disrespect, that means it's actually the wife's fault if her husband physically harms her, right? So basically, it doesn't matter if it's a narcissistic boss or a husband, no offense should be acknowledged because there will probably be retaliatory behavior. So basically, when dealing with a narcissistic boss or your husband, you need to lower your expectations, tiptoe around him, compliment him, and avoid triggering him. Okay, so let's debrief this a little bit. So while there were many startling similarities when I was going through these materials, there was also an equally startling difference. And that is that all of the sources I cited for dealing with a narcissistic boss, they also have several other suggestions that were absent from the Christian marriage literature. Things like practice self-care, set boundaries, tend to your self-esteem, seek support, and know when and how to get out. The Christian marriage advice was pretty much the complete opposite. In fact, as demonstrated by the Pearls example, even if you are in a physically dangerous situation, you just need to stay. Wives of harsh husbands are continually instructed to pray and study their Bibles and make themselves as small as humanly possible in hopes that they will not upset their husbands. The same husbands who are somehow deserving of unconditional adoration and respect. Being involved in this culture for many years, I learned very early on this concept that men need respect and women need love. Men are very sensitive to being disrespected. So women are to perform something akin to unconditional worship in order to make sure that men don't feel threatened. And even within that, I didn't hear nearly the amount of call for husbands to love their wives as for wives to respect their husbands. When it was talked about, it was something to the effect of like, hey, listen guys, sometimes she's going to be out of her mind, outlandishly emotional, especially when she's on her period, but you just need to tolerate her anyway, because that's an example of Christ loving the church. It was not in any way equal or comparable. There was even a book that you might be familiar with by Emerson Eckridge called Love and Respect. And through a study of Christian marriage books, Sheila Ray Gregoire and her team identified this book as being one of the most harmful books out there in terms of Christian marriage. They actually have a free handout on why it's so bad. And from this point on, I'm going to reference their work a lot because they have done a lot of work in this space when really hardly anyone else is doing the work to give healthy marriage advice. So I'm not going to rehash all of that, but I do want to point out that the point that Eggerichs makes that women primarily need love and men primarily need respect is in no way supported by empirical research. And the research question that led to this conclusion is not it's not in any way a reliable measure on what they say they were trying to measure. And let me say that again, because some of you are hearing this for the first time. There is no peer-reviewed research that supports the concept that men need respect and women need love. That it's not out there. It does not exist. And on the topic of research, I hope this whole thing with narcissism and Christian marriage advice is explored further, although I do think we have some peripheral findings. But I do have a theory on what might be happening and why there's so much parallel between these two domains of advice. I do see how many men, and not all of them, but many of them are very sensitive to criticism. But I don't think this has as much to do with a fundamental gender difference as this does how little boys are raised. Between my own experience in Christian culture, the experiences of others who have shared their experiences growing up in Christian culture or not growing up in Christian culture, there seem to be some key differences on how little girls and little boys are raised that I think might be contributing for this need for respect that men supposedly have. And while there might be similarities outside of Christian circles on how boys and girls are raised, there is an added element in Christianity that does not exist in the greater culture, and that is the spiritual aspect of all of this. Outside of Christianity, some things might be bad, but inside of Christianity, some things are labeled sinful, and those sinful things can have eternal consequences according to some theologies. And that difference is very intense. Not only are you told, no, that's bad, don't do that, you're told, that's sinful, you might go to hell, don't do that. Those are two very different things. So while there might be similarities to this outside of Christianity and whatever other religions might believe these sorts of things, just bring it to an entirely different level. Okay, but here are some of the specific things I'm talking about. Number one is little boys' emotions. So I can't tell you how many times I have heard something to the effect, being told to a little boy, something like, only little girls cry, stop being such a baby, are you on your period or something? And these things start very young. And with them also comes this added layer of shame where boys are accused, if they're showing some sort of emotion, they're accused of being feminine or gay. And while I don't believe there's anything wrong with being gay, the loudest parts of the Christian church strongly disagree, and any sense of femininity is immediately condemned, and the boys are often threatened with hell if they continue to show emotions or act in a way that is perceived as being threatening to whatever theology that community holds. Since emotionality is often associated with females, there's often an immense pressure to not appear emotional. On the other hand, girls are expected to be emotional, and that's something that is talked about all the time. If you're not hearing about love and respect, you're hearing about how women are emotional and men are logical. Another thing that's not true. But while girls do experience their own forms of emotional repression in the church, their emotions aren't gendered to make them feel like an outsider if they're feeling them. In fact, even though they're shamed for their emotions, they are not told that they are wrong, inherently wrong for feeling those things. But girls tend to be taught at least some form of emotional recognition or regulation. They at least have an awareness of emotions. But boys get no education on any of that stuff. And so they don't learn how to handle their emotions. They don't learn how to regulate their emotions. And so the thing they resort to is anger, because anger is something that, oh yeah, a strong man showing anger, yeah, that's affirmed. That's okay. And so they grow into men that only know anger, but they don't know how to regulate their anger. They just know that they're allowed to feel anger, and they have no skills on how to process that. Not to mention, anger is a cover emotion. So not only are their emotions just not acknowledged and even demonized at times, they are also told constantly that they need to man up. They aren't allowed to have moments of weakness. And from the time they are little, They are encouraged to stuff down any self-consciousness and emotion so that they can lead. Instead of actually feeling strong, they are usually playing the part. And so when someone questions them or criticizes them, critiques them, they don't have any substance except for anger with which to respond. This gives men, I think, the perceived sense that they fundamentally need respect, but we don't talk about how this perceived need is there so that they can try to compensate for their low self-esteem and lack of emotional intelligence. But all the respect in the world would never heal these parts of them. Number 3, they don't receive the same kind of nurture that little girls receive from their mothers and fathers. And I know that there are pockets of Christianity where this doesn't even happen for girls, but still, the girls are expected to be emotional, and I think that's a key piece in all of this. But since boys are not allowed to be emotional or weak, they don't develop the same kind of security that little girls tend to develop. They are constantly seeking safety and assuredness. Typically, if a little girl gets hurt, she is hugged and held and comforted. But if a little boy gets hurt, he's told to stop being such a sissy and man up and rub some dirt in it. That makes a difference. Not biology, but the lack of safety and assurance that men are neglected from receiving. If those things aren't in place early on, it is very difficult to find them later in life. And that's not impossible, but it takes self-awareness. And if your church is telling you that you're just sensitive because you're a man, then why are you ever going to look to change? You don't think you can change. You think that's just who you are. And furthermore, if you are that sensitive to criticism, will you ever be able to handle someone telling you that you lack skills in these areas? All of these dynamics lead to fragility in their self-esteem and their self-efficacy. They can't be expected to be more than they are because that would imply that they are inadequate. They need to feel worshipped so that they don't feel less than. And they have to be tiptoed around in order to avoid their anger triggers. They have to be fed a steady stream of compliments to prop up their self-esteem because they can't find security in themselves because they were never given it as a child. And instead of giving men this space and the resources to deal with these things so that they can be healthier people, these Christian writers have demanded that wives refrain from necessary critique and defense in the name of that being sinful. Women are called sinful for trying to show men where they need to grow, where they need to heal themselves. When Christian marriage advice looks like advice for dealing with narcissists, what does that say about men? What does that say about the Christian culture that defends and perpetuates this dynamic? Anyone who expects you to be so small so that they can feel more comfortable is not seeking to be your partner. They are not seeking respect. They are seeking to rule over you. Does that sound familiar? Genesis 3:16, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. It was not meant to be this way. A husband wishing to rule over you is a sign of unhealth and bad stuff in the world. So in essence, proponents of these principles have coddled men's hurt instead of doing things to prevent it in the first place, and then blamed women for not being small enough. What I found through this process, this study, this deep dive, is that some Christian marriage advice, a lot of Christian marriage advice, sounds like advice for dealing with narcissists because it is advice for dealing with narcissists. Men who are so prone to rage at the smallest little perceived disrespect because they didn't receive the security and emotional development they needed while growing up. This sets such an incredibly low bar for marriage, and it does not reflect the love of God. This advice is not only belittling to women, it's belittling to men. Women should be valued just as much as men, and men should also receive the support and resources they need in order to feel secure in themselves. This is where holding strict gender roles becomes harmful. All children need love and nurture and security. All people need love and respect in order to flourish in healthy relationships. All people need to have a sense of internal security and self-esteem so that they can receive critique and continue to be better humans for the people around them. and for themselves. I want better for men, and it breaks my heart that this system that claims to be built on these holy principles continues to damage men, and instead of addressing that hurt, they continue to twist the facts to keep them in these harmful cycles. I want men to feel secure enough in themselves that they can handle their wives expressing the things that they don't like or the things that they have done wrong and responding appropriately. I want men to feel a sense of peace and security so that they don't have to constantly be complimented and affirmed by the people around them in order to feel okay about themselves. And I've seen the difference in my own life. The men I know that were either raised in nurturing environments or learned those things later in life, they don't need to be treated like narcissists. They can listen to critique and adjust as needed, and it's not a big deal. They are thoughtful, they are caring. If they're married, they go out of their way to make sure their wives feel supported as partners. They put to shame the horribly low expectations that are set by far too many church leaders today. And they prove it's possible that they don't need such a low bar set for them. I want better for women. I want women to actually be safe in relationships, not just with their partners, but with the Christian leaders who are giving them marriage advice. I want women to be seen as absolute equals because they are. We have to do better. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg because we have to get comfortable with challenging leaders and authors who write such awful, harmful things. And y'all, we need to get comfortable with the fact that some good quality trauma therapy might be the answer for a lot of men in this situation. It's really important to get connected to someone who is well-versed in trauma, is licensed, and is not a biblical counselor. Spoiler alert, that is an upcoming topic. So if you're not sure on why I have such strong feelings about that, you'll find out soon. But we have to do better for everyone, not just for the men, not just for the women, also for the children who are growing up in these homes and watching this dynamic play out. Now, I told you I was quoting people like the Transformed Wife and the Pearls, and they might seem extreme. Number one, I personally know people who follow their work, so that's number one. Number two is that this is not a niche corner on Christianity. Because maybe you don't know Lori Alexander or the Pearls or any of the other people I mentioned, but I would bet big money that the church you're in or have been in, there are or were softer messages being taught. But softer does not mean better. Not only that, but the book I mentioned, Love and Respect, is one of the top-selling Christian marriage books out there. It is often given as a marriage gift. And it sounds so innocuous, right? Men need respect, women need love. But it's trash. It's a lie. And it's a lie that hurts people. So, with all of that said, what are some better materials out there, right? So the Gottman Institute has a lot of stuff, a lot of resources, a lot of information for marriage. So I definitely recommend the Gottman Institute. For Christians specifically, if you are set on finding things that are specifically for Christians, Bare Marriage is a really great resource. I mentioned Sheila Ray Gregoire earlier. She is behind Bare Marriage. Her and her team, they are phenomenal. They have a podcast with so many incredible episodes. And Sheila and her husband recently put out a marriage book. And it is based on actual research. And I hope that it is an incredible turning of the tide in the Christian marriage space. So here's the thing. If you still attend church and your church is teaching harmful messages, it's so important that you speak up. We need to get loud about these materials, why they're bad, the fact that they hurt men, they hurt women, they hurt children, they hurt everybody involved. Take a look through the resources I mentioned. Find some things that you can recommend instead of whatever is being taught. And here's the thing. I have no illusions about the fact that, oh, they'll listen and everything will be great. No, they probably won't listen. But we can't be complicit in these teachings. We have to say something because otherwise nothing is ever going to change. That's how we got to 2025 and Love and Respect, even though it's trash and it's not even based on real evidence, it's still one of the best selling marriage advice books. I'm happy that people are starting to say things. We need to say more things and we need to say them louder. Alternatively, you could get a group together at your church and read one of Sheila's books or something from the Gottman Institute. Whatever it is, sharing this video, I don't care, just do something. We really need to start caring about the health of marriages more than we care about keeping people married. Okay, that was a lot. I don't know how long this video was going to be. I know I recorded over an hour, so some of that was just me not knowing my words. So I hope you got something good out of this. I'm not a man hater. I would really love for men to not be raised as narcissists because that's bad for them. It's bad for everyone else. If you enjoyed this, you can subscribe. Probably no one has ever told you that before, but you can subscribe to these YouTube channels so that you never miss a video, right? I primarily post on Instagram. We have a lot of good discussions over there, so if you want to join us, you can find me there at The Christian Advocate. I have a blog, I'm on Threads. I exist in most places because there are just certain topics that lend themselves better to certain mediums. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'm not sure which topic I'm going to tackle next. I think it's probably going to be biblical counseling, so if you want a mental health professional's take on that, stick around.